Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Power Hour. We are going to be talking about the shocking truth about lead follow-up. So let's begin. So the shocking truth about lead follow-up. With us today, we have our speaker, Gary Gerber, who's Senior Director of Product Marketing with Conversica. Gary currently leads the product marketing team over at Conversica, which is a suite of artificial intelligence applications that support sales, service, finance, and customer success. So thank you for joining us today, Gary. I'm going to give you the floor.
Awesome. Thank you, Jennifer. Thanks so much for having me here today.
Of course. Thanks for joining.
Get the screen going. Okay, we good to go?
Good to go.
Excellent. Thanks so much again. Hi, folks. Thanks for joining us today. As Jennifer mentioned, my name is Gary Gerber. I do head up product marketing at Conversica. Conversica, as she mentioned, we provide an artificial intelligence-based sales assistant. And sales assistant helps folks follow up with leads. And so we have an intense interest in how companies are doing following up with their sales leads. And I think we can all agree that sales leads are a critical, if not the critical lifeblood of any business, because if you're not selling stuff, you're probably not in business. So because it's such a critical part of business, we decided that it was important to do some research and find out how companies are doing in their efforts to follow up with sales leads. So we commissioned researchers from UC Berkeley and from Cornell to do a research report for us. And here's what they did. You can see there's a picture of the 2016 Sales Effectiveness Report, Lead Follow-Up. You can get your own copy of that yourself. We'll talk about that in a minute if you want to see that yourself. But here's what the researchers did. So they reached out to 538 companies across 9 industries. You can see in the box below, there's a list of them. There's some B2C, some B2B, pretty good spread, pretty good range of different types of companies. And what the researchers did is they then presented themselves to these companies as the hottest sales lead they could possibly present themselves as. So if the company had a web page with a, chat with us or contact us type of thing, they filled out the web form. And if it was an auto dealer, they said, I'm interested in buying a car. And if it was, anything like that, whatever it took to present themselves as a very hot lead. And then they waited. And they waited to see over multiple weeks who responded, who didn't, how long did it take them, and how persistent were they, all the good things we're going to talk about here, to see who's really doing the job and who is not. And they didn't cheat. They did it during just standard business days and hours, and they used just standard methods, email, that kind of thing. So make it as easy as possible for these companies to do the right thing and leverage it. And this is important, right? Because presumably most, if not all of these companies have spent a lot of money and a lot of resources on getting people to want to engage with them. And so if they're not maximizing that as an opportunity, they're almost certainly leaving sales on the table. Number one insight. Out of all those companies, 1 out of 3 of them did not respond at all. So here we have a potential customer reached out to them, again, hottest kind of lead you could possibly be, raised their hand, said, I want to engage with your company. And yet 1 out of 3 of the companies did not respond. No email, not even an autoresponder, nothing. We heard, the researchers heard nothing back from them. And this is shocking, right? Because again, the average company spends about 10% of their revenue, not profit, 10% of their revenue on marketing. And yet 1 out of 3 companies are throwing that out the window by not responding to the hottest lead. Number 2, 2 out of the 3 companies gave up way too soon. They reached out, they did something, they responded in some fashion, but they gave up after just 1 or 2 tries, which again is alarming because yes, it's important that they reached out, but we all know, I mean, if I could see you folks right now raising your hands, I'd say, who here responds to a marketing email the first time? The answer would be like no one, maybe the second time, but the reality is you need a lot more tries. And yet 2 out of 3 companies gave up quickly. Number 3, the fact is 3 out of 3 companies can do better. So this is the second year in a row that we've done this research report. We did it in 2015 as well. And it was interesting when you compared the results, because what happened is everyone who was in the 2015 report, we also included in the 2016 research. And many companies did quite well in 2015, and many companies did quite poorly in 2015. But in 2016, of the companies that did extremely well in 2015, just about none of them did well again in 2016. So it's probably not that hard to be good, but apparently it's really difficult, if not impossible, to be good consistently. And again, what good is it if you're good only now and then? You want to be good consistently. So the research that we did based on this research, based on our experience with having millions and millions and millions of conversations with potential sales leads on behalf of customers, we've categorized the best practices for kind of maximizing the opportunity or maximizing the benefit you derive from your sales leads into 4 categories, 4 best practices for making sure that you're wringing the value out. And the 4 Ps are promptness, personalization, persistence, and performance. And what we mean by those, and we'll go into more detail on each of these in a moment, is promptness, right? We all know, certainly any salespeople in the audience know, that time kills all deals. When somebody reaches out to you, you need to get back to them as quickly as possible because people move on to other things. We're all very busy. And if you don't get to them while they're expressing interest or very quickly thereafter, the odds are you're going to lose their attention, and we all know that the likelihood of a sale plummets, particularly in B2C, but in B2B as well. Personalization means if I get an autoresponder email saying, "Thank you for your query, we will respond soon," I'm at best disappointed because it doesn't sound like they're talking to me, and I'm at worst maybe kind of offended because that's all they think of me. So personalization, you want the email or the response to be personal. Persistence, we talked about this a minute ago. You can't give up after 1 or 2 tries because you're not going to reach anybody. You have to be persistent and try as many times as it takes. And performance, we needed a 4P, and we couldn't think of a P that means getting through the spam filter, but that's what we mean. Your email has to perform. If it gets caught in a spam filter, it's for naught. So 4 Ps of successful lead follow-up: promptness, personalization, persistence, and performance. So let's take a look at promptness in a little more detail. According to Velocify, the likelihood of a conversion, and this is kind of common sense. We all know if you don't get back quickly, that's a problem, but just how quickly could be shocking. According to Velocify, if you don't get back within 3 minutes of someone downloading the white paper or sending you an email and asking for information or whatever they did to raise their hand, if you don't get back within 3 minutes, the likelihood of converting them drops significantly. And even within 5 minutes, if you can do within 5 minutes, it's tremendously more likely that you're going to reach someone versus just waiting, half an hour. And you do it even within an hour. I mean, for heaven's sakes, it's still much more likely, according to lead response management, to qualify the person and ultimately convert them. So this is significant. You've got to be fast if you want to be first. So how did the companies do on our promptness, on promptness in the research report? Well, as we discussed earlier, almost 2/3 of the companies failed to respond within 5 minutes. So again, somebody's raised their hand, said, "I'm really interested in your product or your service or whatever it is," and 60% of companies failed to respond within best practices. Interestingly, when you look at the results down below, you can see some of the companies that were really quick. Education teaches how it's done. We thought that was kind of amusing. Education did relatively particularly well. Even they only reached the 56% of education companies scored an A. But at least relative to everybody else, that was pretty good. And education, I think it's because they recognize that it's a very personal kind of thing. people are probably considering multiple options. You know, if you're checking in about university options, you're looking at lots of different, and they realize that if they don't get in there fast, the person's probably going to be in a conversation with another competing education institute, and then what will that do? Although surprisingly, over on the right side, that it's surprising that for the same reasons auto wasn't higher. We would have thought that they would be much, you know, somebody contacts multiple dealerships. Presumably, I'm looking for a Toyota out there, and there are 4 Toyota dealerships in my area. I'm probably talking to all of them, so one would have expected auto to be faster, but apparently not. So if we look at the grade distribution on the left, we can see, I'll use my little pointer thing. We can see people, overall though, companies did pretty good, right? We got 42% A's, kind of a spread here on B's and C's, and let's see, not so many D's, not so many D's, not so many F's. So overall, people were doing not too badly on promptness, but obviously there's still a tremendous amount of room for opportunity. More than half of the companies did not score A's, didn't get back in time. Personalization. So it's important to respond quickly, obviously, but it's also important, as we discussed a few minutes ago, to make sure that, you know, when the person receives an email from you, that they really feel engaged with your company. They feel that your company cares about them and recognizes it. And too many times I download a white paper or something, and again, I get a generic email that just says, "Thank you for contacting us," which it's disappointing. So let's take a look. You know, email from an individual. If the email comes from an address, you know, Gary G, you know, whatever my email address is at Conversica.com. If it comes from me, the likelihood of somebody clicking through is substantially higher. And if it includes a signature, you know, from Gary, it goes up even more. And if it looks like a personal letter, something that I sent, not that marketing sent or that an Autobot sent or something like that, people are much more likely to click through as well. So here's a sample of what a really good personalized email might look like, some of the factors that make it good, right? So you can see specific contact information, not just from salesbusiness.com, but it's from Joe. And personalized greeting, right? It's specifically to Amy. It's not just thank you. Why did Amy reach out? She downloaded a white paper. She visited you at the web page, at the trade show, whatever. Why? She wants to know that. If she wants to continue engaging, make it easy, right? Ask the question, what's the next step? And then make it easy for her to do that next step. Give her specific contact information or something like that. So all this is about making it easy for the person to do what you feel is the right thing for them to do and make them feel like you really actually care about them. How do our companies do on personalization? Again, about half the companies got an A, which is good news, bad news, because it means about half the companies didn't get an A, but half of them dropped the personalization bar. And this is important because personalization seriously drives response. If you want people to click through and respond and engage, we're all people, and people want to feel like they're being connected with, and so it's important to treat people like people. Here, interesting, industry-wise, auto did step up. And they were, while they didn't necessarily respond as quickly as one might have expected or hoped, very high level of personalization, which makes sense, right? Because again, people are considering lots of options, and you want to make sure people feel comfortable in an auto dealer's case, coming into the showroom. Interestingly, flipped education wound up being the lowest, being number 5 on this one. So you interpret what you want from it, but it was kind of interesting that the two of them flipped on the personalization front. The third P is persistence. It's up to, obviously you want to respond quickly and you want to respond in a personalized way, but you also need to be persistent. We're all very busy people. I know I pretty much never respond to an email the first time, second time, third time. And in fact, best practices show that companies with the fastest growing revenues most likely to attempt contact with a lead 5 to 8 times. And in fact, there's research from Yesware and Velocify that shows that overall response conversion rates, they continue to grow beyond 8 attempts. Now, it's challenging, right? This is probably the hardest one to do, because in order to be persistent, that takes people's time, and people's time is really tough. So, it's one thing for a salesperson or an SDR or a BDR to reach out to somebody once and then to reach out to them twice. But for them to have to do it 4 times, 8 times, 12 times, probably just not enough hours in the day, especially when other hot leads are coming down the pike, and those may be the ones that are more interesting and attractive to pursue. And yet, if they could find a way to be persistent, they would pull dramatically more sales out of their leads. Statistics show it. So how do our companies do on persistence? Well, we know over half of the companies that didn't respond gave up after 2 or fewer attempts, which we talked about before. So even when companies responded, 2 or fewer attempts, companies are giving up. And again, places the highest demand on a rep's time, so it makes total sense. And part of the reason that that the reps are not so persistent is it takes a lot of time, but more importantly, the value of persistence decreases over time. So when I reach out the first time, the second time, those are much higher likelihood of converting than the person who waits till the 8th or the 10th time. So as a salesperson, I'm less likely to want to be involved with those people on the 8th and the 10th time. But the fact is, there's still potential sales out there. And if you give up on those people, you're leaving sales on the table. So you need to figure out a way to be persistent in a cost-effective, scalable way. Performance. This is a fascinating statistic. This one actually caught me even by surprise. 50% of business emails end up in spam filters. 50% of them end up in spam filters. And that's consistent across all sorts of industries and organizations. And it's getting, from a marketer's perspective or a salesperson's perspective, it's getting worse, not better. The spam, from a consumer or an email receiver perspective, it's getting better. But we all know spam filters are getting much, much more sophisticated. And the inundation of spam is getting worse. And so it's getting harder and harder and harder to get your message through a spam filter. So it's not enough to be prompt or personalized or persistent again, because if that prompt, personalized, persistent message gets caught in a spam filter, from the consumer's perspective, the only perspective that really matters ultimately, you never responded. So we used a company that specializes in measuring how companies perform against spam filters named Send Forensics, and they looked at the email responses, and based on their extensive experience and knowledge dealing with spam filters, they were able to grade the responses for the likelihood of them getting through a spam filter. And the fact is, only 2% of companies this year received an A from Send Forensics' perspective. In other words, had a relatively high likelihood of getting their email through the spam filter. Only 2% had a high likelihood versus 43% last year. So as we can see, as I mentioned before, the spam filters are getting a lot better. And so marketers and salespeople are going to have to get a lot better to keep up with them. And this year they did not. Interesting correlation, though. Of the companies who did earn an A in performance, they all pretty much earned an A in personalization as well. So while these are separate P's, separate factors in success, there does appear to be a pretty direct correlation in that if you're being good about personalization, that probably enhances the likelihood of you getting through a spam filter. So extra food for thought there. And we can see the companies that scored, well, nobody scored super great, but of the companies that scored well in performance, media and publishing did particularly well. Technology was on the lower end, and the companies who got the overarching grades were kind of in the middle. Plenty of room for improvement there. So overall, how did companies do? We can see, as you'd expect, you've got kind of a bell curve here, mostly B's and C's as you'd expect. Not very many A's, not very many companies doing the job really, really well. Well, the ones who are doing well, who's doing well? Auto's doing relatively well. I mean, again, good news, bad news. Good news is 31% got A's. Bad news is that means some 60%, over almost 70% didn't get A's. So that's food for thought. Auto did probably pretty well. There are a lot of mandates by auto manufacturers for how they execute with their potential customers. Obviously, there's a high touch. So auto, interestingly, brokerages, I'm afraid, didn't do so well. Education, while they did particularly well on some factors, not necessarily so well overall. Media and technology kind of a little better than the bottom, but obviously everyone, lots of room for improvement. So how do we improve? First, in order to improve, you have to kind of understand what's preventing your company from getting an A. Obviously, no company sets out to do a poor job of following up with their leads. On the contrary, they spent a lot of money, a lot of resources and time to get those leads. And so if they're not doing the job with them, why are they not doing the job with them? And there's several factors, right? The salespeople among us will know, or among the people know, there's bias. And bias sounds like a bad thing, but not necessarily. I mean, if somebody has experience with leads from a certain source versus another source, or if they come from a certain email addresses, corporate email addresses versus Gmail addresses or whatever, they can't, salespeople, as we said, can't follow up with every single lead 12 times, not enough hours in the day. So bias is going to come into play as they look at the different leads. And process bottlenecks, right? Or do they have the tools they need in order to do the job properly? And they're going to cherry pick along the same lines, right? And mistakes, they just sometimes salespeople will overlook the best leads for very myriad reasons, or maybe there's been turnover and they have inexperienced salespeople, so they make mistakes. Oh, there we go, turnover, as I mentioned. Lack of visibility into the process, and as a marketer, a lot of the marketers can understand. They send over what they believe or what they try to make the very best leads, but they can't really tell which are the best leads after the fact. They kind of have to take the salesperson's word for it. But there are so many factors that are out of a marketer's control when leads are sent over. Did it go to a good salesperson, an experienced salesperson, or a new salesperson? Was there bias? Was there not? And so marketers need some kind of an unbiased way of actually seeing whether or not leads are making it through and customers are engaging. And consistent training, and obviously cost. It's prohibitive to have the best salespeople following up on the best leads 12 times. Just there's probably no practical way to do that with people. So, kind of a word from our sponsors, but if you can't do it with people, you're going to want to introduce automation. And that's really been impossible up until now. Automation until now has been able to kind of help people do the job a little better, but not been able to actually offload some of the work from people so that people could do what they need to do. But the automation is actually, technology is actually now finally caught up with the need. So think about it, right? What if you, instead of having people trying to be prompt and personal and persistent and always performing 24/7 all the time, which is impossible, what if you could have an automated sales development rep doing it for you, right? They basically enforce, or they'd act on the 4 Ps 100% of the time, 24/7, always in a good mood, never has a fight with their significant other, gets crabby, always on message. As we know, oftentimes SDRs and salespeople can be off message, kind of winging it, and that may or may not be a problem. And perhaps most importantly, anybody who's a salesperson on this line knows that if you spend most of your day trying to reach out to people to engage them, the vast majority of what you're doing is getting knocked down. And that's discouraging for people, but an automated sales assistant wouldn't. And the fact is, we're going to introduce it because you actually can have that automated, that AI sales assistant now. And that's what Conversica offers. This is a word from your sponsors. This is an actual conversation from our archives. Didn't doctor it up, as you can see, just kind of hid the secret information to protect the innocent. But the AI assistant makes you 4 Ps compliant 100% of the time, and it has done so for hundreds of millions of conversations. This is not a garage experiment. So we can see David did something. What did he do? He attended Channel Partners, he attended an event, and the assistant reached out with just a real simple email. You can see it's personalized, it was prompt, it will perform well. And he responded, and she'll do this as many times as she needs to. She's persistent. She'll do it 8 times, 12 times, whatever. Different messages, mixing it up like a good salesperson would do. And eventually, David responded. And not only did he responded, he had a good experience because she's not a salesperson trying to beat him up. She's just an assistant trying to help him get what he needs. So he's happy to respond. All the time we get this kind of responses. Thanks for being persistent. Appreciate it. You're a nice person. Sometimes they'll actually say, you know, gee, you were really good. Do you want to come work for us? It really happens, believe it or not. She gets back, and her goal is to be a matchmaker. Ultimately, she's not trying to sell. Her job is to connect David with a person at the company who can help him. So she pulls Mara. We're integrated with Salesforce. She looked in there and saw that Mara was his assigned salesperson, said, Mara's looking to reach you. Looked in Salesforce. There's the phone number he gave when he registered for the event. Is this the best number to reach you on? Just like a good assistant would do. Dave had a great experience, even gave her a little compliment. And again, this is not made up. This is straight from our archives. Gave him not only, let's see, I guess he liked the phone number. Oftentimes they give a new phone number because the phone number they registered with is bogus. Also gave her a good time to call. Now she steps out and she contacts Mara, sends Mara an email, reaches out to her through Salesforce, says, hi, I've been talking with David. He's interested. Here's the conversation that we had. Go get him. And now Mara spends her days talking to the Davids of the world. Mara spends her days talking to people who are interested in talking with her. And so she's spending her time doing what people should be doing. Clients trying to close deals instead of this, hello, thanks for, do you want to talk to somebody, don't you? Which is really kind of a waste of people's time if there's a way to automate it, and now there is. But then the automated assistant goes one step further. A few days later, she reaches out to David one more time and just says, hey, I want to make sure, did you connect with Mara? Do you have everything you need? And of course, nobody here will be surprised to know that many, many times people say, no, Mara never called me, or we played phone tag, but we never talked, or whatever. In this case, he had a good experience and he did talk with Mara. But the beauty of this is for both sales management and marketing, for the very first time, they have objective visibility into how the sales process is working from the only perspective that really matters, the perspective of the customer. Did they get what they need? Are they engaged? And that's hugely important for sales management to make sure that the sales folks are performing the way they would hope. And it's important for marketing because that way they can determine, oh, which lead sources are actually engaging people. I can't control as a marketer how well the sale goes, but I can certainly benefit from understanding which of these leads are engaging and which of the leads are not. This is of course, the standard logo slide we all know. But this is, again, this is not a 5 guys in a garage with an experiment. We've been doing this for 7 years, have major customers like Chrysler and Epson and HP and IBM. These companies are trusting their AI assistant to reach out on their behalf to their potential customers. And 95% of those conversations have no human involved at all until the conversation is handed over to the sales rep after a successful exchange. So these guys have a lot of trust in us. And that is my presentation. So I'd like to open the floor up if there are questions. I would be delighted to answer them.
Great. Thank you so much, Gary. So just again, everybody, just a reminder, if you do have any questions, please go ahead and submit them using the Q&A function located in the lower right-hand side of your console. Just simply type in the question and hit send. So we'll give you guys just a few seconds to start sending over any questions, and then we'll get started with Q&A. Oh, I spoke too soon. We've got one question. Okay. So the question is, they're coming in. So do you think your solution fits for startups?
That's a great question. So at the highest level, the solution works for any company that has inbound sales leads, is trying to sell something, right? So at the highest level, the answer is absolutely. Obviously, the solution isn't free, so there's probably a crossover point. If you have 3 inbound leads per month, as some startups do, there may not be logic in automating following up. It's probably not hard for a person to follow up with 3 leads, even persistently and personally. But once you start getting up, a fairly successful startup, once you're getting up into, 100 inbound leads a month, that kind of thing, then yeah, then it starts to make a lot of sense to look at it. So yes.
That makes sense. Gary, we've got a couple more questions that have come in. So we have a question that says, do you have to pre-write all of the follow-up messages, or is it completely automated?
Awesome question. So the way that I like to have people think about it is, imagine, again, this is an AI automated sales assistant. So imagine if you went and hired a human sales assistant who was experienced and competent and knew how to do the job, but didn't necessarily know your company so well. So what would you say to that person? You wouldn't teach them what to say. They know what to say. You just tell them the basics. You'd point them at Salesforce and you'd say, hey, look, there's 1,000 people who visited us at Dreamforce last week. Go follow up with them. And the assistant would know to pull the name of the person, the salesperson, but you'd give them enough information so that assistant knew to say, thanks for visiting us at Dreamforce, right, to make it a little more personal and that kind of thing. So the answer to the question is no. You're hiring an experienced sales assistant who has already had literally millions of these conversations, and so knows what's the best cadence, what's the best language, what's the best timing, times of day, best words to use, best phraseology. How do you mix it up to give that potential customer the best experience and increase and maximize the likelihood of them responding? All you do is kind of like a Mad Lib style. You fill in a couple of blanks. Oh, they visited you at a trade show. Oh, they downloaded this white paper or whatever, and then let the assistant go. So it really is that easy.
Great, great. We have one other question that's asking, is it available in other languages?
Oh, great question. So the answer is today, it's English only. It is multiple dialects of English. We have customers in Australia and Europe and that kind of thing. And certainly the roadmap is to extend to other languages soon, but today it is just multiple dialects of English.
Great. Thank you, Gary. I think those are all the questions now. If anyone else does have a question and we just didn't get a chance to cover off on it, please feel free to email it to us at ampteam@salesforce.com, and we'll follow up with you then. So,
Jennifer, can I stop in for 1 second real quick? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for interrupting. I just want to point out, as folks can see on the screen, there is a link right there if you want. Oh, did they still see the screen? No? Yes.
I think they just lost it. I can give it back to you, though.
Can we give them back the screen real quick, please? Thank you. There we go. So anybody who wants to download their copy of the report that we discussed today, you can see there's a link there on the left. And also, if you are curious how your company would have performed, go ahead and fill out the form on the right side, that link. And many of the companies that were in the research this year were companies that, after seeing last year's, asked to be included. And so if you want to be included, do that, and we'll actually, after the research is done, send you the results. You can see how your company performed, which is often pretty educational. And obviously, if you want to learn more about us, period, at the bottom, just visit us at Conversica.com. Okay, that's enough words from our sponsor. Now back to you, Jennifer.
Thanks, Gary. So that's it for today. So just a reminder, today's Power Hour and all our past Power Hour recordings can be found at p.force.com/Power Hour. And thanks for joining us today. So have a great remainder of your day. Bye.